Today, I'm going to be sharing all of my production secrets that have got my music nominated for 2 Grammys and also helped me work with artists like Future, 21 Savage, SZA, and more. I'm going to go over a bunch of tips that you can use to make your music more fire instantly. And if you stick around, I'm even going to show you some of my go-to VSTs, effects plugins, and I'm also going to give you a free cheat sheet that you can use to improve your music. So stick around for that, but enough talking. Let's get into it. One major thing that I see a lot of producers struggling with is sound selection. So if you struggle with sound selection, I would highly recommend that you make yourself like a little cheat sheet of combos of different instruments and sounds that you can use together for each type of genre or vibe that you want to make with your music. So for example, I make a lot of Drake R&B type of melodies. And if you listen to a lot of Drake R&B songs, there's typically a piano, a vocal chop, maybe some synth pads, some synth bass, and maybe some electric piano. And then every time I go to make one of those loops, I can just kind of check off each instrument that I should add. So you should go and listen to all of your favorite songs and figure out what instruments are used in the melody, what kind of drum sounds they use for the drums, and then create a little cheat sheet for yourself that you can use as a template that you can build off of. But don't let that box you in and make you only use those certain sounds when making a certain type of beat. But making a cheat sheet that you can always reference back to can be super useful to help you choose better sounds for the melodies and beats that you're working on. The next thing you can do is save your effects templates. And this looks different in every DAW, but in mine, as you can see right here, I've got all of these different presets right here. So every time that I make a preset that I like, if I'm mixing a vocal or if I'm mixing a piano or whatever it is, I'll save that mixing preset. So I already have all of those effects and settings loaded up so that in a future beat, if I want to mix a vocal the same way that I did in that past loop, I can immediately just choose that same preset, put it on the vocal, and I'll have the same effects. So that's a huge time saver, and it can even help you to build your own sound, your own signature kind of style that you're using on all of your sounds. And having your own sound is super, super important, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But speaking of effects chains, I'm always getting asked how I mix my vocals and my samples. So I figured I'd go through and show you my go-to vocal template right now. So if we listen right here, I've got this raw vocal that I got back from my vocalist. One more time, which sounds sick on its own, but I like to add some more sauce to it to kind of bring it back and make it more spacey in the mix. So most of the time I'm going for this preset that I created right here, the filtered vocal delayed. And what this is just the RC20. It's the magnitude transition 2 preset, which adds some reverb and it also EQs it a little bit right here. And with that alone, it sounds like this. One more time. Then I add on Valhalla Vintage Verb, and then I add on H delay from Waves, which is my favorite delay to use. It just has such a nice texture, and with all those together, it sounds like this. One more time. And then depending on the vibe I'm going for, I might delete the reverb. Might even put on this Decimort 2, which is a filter. One more time. But you can see how that would save a ton of time because I don't have to go through and choose all these different plugins every single time I have a new vocal. I can just instantly get the preset that I liked in the past, tweak it a little bit for each sample that I make, and go from there. Another thing I love to do with my samples is to cook up at a slower BPM so that I can speed it up and pitch it up later to give it that kind of warped sampled vibe that's used a ton in rap beats. So to give you guys an example of this, I'm gonna go into one of my loop kits right here and grab one of the slow versions of my loops. So at the original tempo that I cooked it up, it sounds like this. Which sounds super dope. But to get that warped sample feeling, if you pitch and speed it up to say 160, it sounds like this. And one key with this is you want to bounce it to audio before you speed it up. And the reason that you want to do this instead of just speeding it up in MIDI is because when you speed up the audio, it's going to kind of mess it up and warp it in a way that sounds super, super cool. So if you're not already doing that, cook up at slower BPM so that you can speed it up later. It gives it a really, really cool sampled vibe. Another thing that's helped me a ton with my music is making my own presets. So I would highly recommend that you take some time and watch some tutorials on YouTube learning sound design. And you don't even need to really go all the way in depth in all of this crazy synthesizer synthesizer knowledge, sound design stuff, just get a basic knowledge of what some of the knobs do, and then go in and just mess around making presets in synths that you already have. But if you're looking for a synth that's good for sound designing, I personally use Pigments, and it's been amazing for someone who doesn't really know what they're doing sound designing. I just kind of mess with the knobs and I can tweak them to make any sound that I really want, which has been super important to making kind of my own sound, because I can just create the sounds that I want for my loops, and you can sell them in preset packs later down the line for some extra money. One other thing that you can do to really clean up your mixes, especially with instruments that you're playing chords with in the lower octaves, is to start EQing out the lower mids in that instrument. So let me give you a little example. So I've got this piano pulled up right here, which sounds fine, but when you start to add in a bass line and drums that are taking up a lot of the lower end frequencies, it can get super muddy if you're leaving in all of these low frequencies right there, and it can also be super boomy in headphones once you're listening for that. So what I like to do is grab the EQ, put it up like this, and find those, like this frequency is super boomy. So I take that down, but not too much to where the piano starts to feel thin, because I still want some of that low end, but I just go in, especially from like the 100 to 300 range, and I'm just finding these frequencies that are making it sound a little bit muddy. And in my opinion, that makes it sound a lot cleaner already. The next thing you can do that'll improve your mix a ton is creating space with panning and also with EQs. And I feel like I can show you better than I can explain it. So let's hop into this sample that I just made and break it down. All right, so as you can see, this is kind of a complex project file. And a lot of the times when you have a lot of layers, it can start to sound kind of muddy and just everything is globbed together into this mess of sound. So what I like to do, especially when I've got a lot of layers, is I'll pan instruments. So as you can see right here, the strings and the brass are taking up very similar frequencies, but I still want both of them in this melody. So I'm gonna pan one to the left and one to the right. And then I've also added on these EQs right here on the strings and an EQ right here on the brass, getting rid of lower end frequencies because I want to create space for the chords and the bass to take up more of the lower mid end frequencies. And I want these strings and bass to take up the high end frequencies. And then I've done a very similar thing here with the vocals. So I've got this one lead vocal, which I want right in the middle because I want it to be the main focus. But then I've got all of these layers of backing vocals, and as you can see, I've panned this one left, this one right, this one hard left, hard right. It creates more space in the mix instead of just trying to run everything right up the middle, and it also just makes it sound way more wide and big. This is what the sample sounds like. Another thing that can really level up your melodies, especially, and take them to a different level, is adding distortion. I know a lot of people are scared to over distort stuff and want to leave it clean, but if you like that vintage sampled kind of sound, distorting your stuff is kind of an essential to get that authentic vintage sound. Let's take this piano for example. So by itself, it sounds clean like this. There's nothing wrong with this. It sounds good on its own, but let's play it with a little distortion and you can see how it adds a ton of feeling to it. It's just so much more mean, you know what I mean? And then if you pair that with some delay and reverb and a couple EQs to clean it up, you get something like this. Just way more feeling and atmosphere. Another thing I get asked about all the time is my master chain, and I use the same exact mastering chain for both my samples and my beats, and it's super simple. So before I go through what it is, let me just show you this beat without it. It sounds fine, but as you can see right there, it's clipping and it's not really hitting hard, so it's kind of a lose-lose. But once you put all the effects on, it hits way harder compared to this. So pretty much my master chain is this very, very slight EQ, just taking out some super, super low end frequencies and then also boosting the high end just a little bit. And I find that this gives your drums more of a crunchy sound where the high end kind of stands out. And then for the next plugin, I've got this expander, which pretty much just makes stuff louder. The last plugin is this adaptive limiter, which is pushing the gain up 3, but it's keeping the ceiling. So it's pushing the volume up, but making sure that it doesn't go over 0 decibels. And I use this on every single beat, every single sample that I use. I never change it. It's always the same exact settings. One more quick thing that can make your bass sound cleaner, especially when you like to pitch your samples up and down. Make sure that you're not pitching up your synth basses in audio files. If you bounce down your whole entire loop and then you want to pitch it at the end, make sure that you exclude the synth bass MIDI and then layer that in after and then match that to the new pitch. Because if you listen right here, this is what our synth bass sounds like as an audio file with no pitch. sounds clean. But let's say you wanted to pitch it up something crazy like 8 semitones, just so you can really hear the artifacts that it creates when you pitch it up as an audio file. It makes the bass just sound messed up. Like, it takes the life out of the bass and it just adds these weird frequencies that shouldn't be there. But if you were to just take that same bass MIDI and then just pitch it up 8 in the VST, it sounds normal like it should. Another thing that helps so much with the sonics and just overall quality of your stuff is going above and beyond. The way that I do this personally is hiring session musicians and vocalists to help me bring my ideas to life, because I find so many times if I'm just trying to use VSTs, a lot of the time I'm just limited to what those VSTs can produce because they never really match up to the real thing. So if you learn a real instrument yourself, or you collaborate with someone who knows how to play the instrument, or if you do what I do and hire session musicians, you can get a way better end result. And most producers are not willing to do this, so you have a huge edge on the competition and way more of a fighting chance of making yourself stand out and get people to use your stuff. But if you can't afford to hire session musicians for every loop you want to make, and you want some real instrument phrases and super soulful vocal samples, I just dropped a kit for $7 that has vocal samples, flute phrases, violin, live piano, live guitar, everything you could want, and it's less than the price of a fast food meal. So if you want to check out the Mini Stash 2 kit, it'll be the first link in the description down below. As far as music theory goes, I think the number one thing that you can do to improve your music is to learn how to play the keys. And in my opinion, the easiest way to start doing this and kind of cheat code it a little bit is to learn one key very well. So for me, I chose C minor, but you could choose keys like C minor or A minor that are both easy to learn. And I played in this key and studied it religiously. And what this did is it made me a lot more confident because my fingers started to figure out where they could go to play inside of this key. And then if I wanted to transpose it later, I could just take the MIDI that I had played and then pitch it up or pitch it down in the DAW. But I can't stress this enough. When you're not limited to what you can click in, the possibilities are much bigger on what you can do instead of just being locked in to doing the same quantized patterns that you're always doing with clicking. Here's one cheeky little trick that you can use to get some super cool like synth runs. So if we take this progression and then put it into D sharp minor right here, we get something like this, which sounds cool. But if you come over to the keyboard right here, in the key of D sharp minor, all of the black keys on the keyboard work together. And the reason it works so well for these synth runs where you just kind of move your hand across all of the black keys is because all the black keys when played together are in the pentatonic scale. And when you play in the pentatonic scale, everything just sounds super smooth. Let me just show you. I'm just playing black keys. So that's one thing you can do to make it sound like you're crazy on the keys without knowing what you're doing. But another thing you can do to kind of fake it till you make it, let's say that you created this progression in MIDI, you just clicked it in, but you want it to have that human touch, but there's no way that you're able to just play this out on the keys by yourself. What you could do is you could stop and go record. Go on the keyboard and figure out like, okay, I need to hit that note with this finger. I need to also hit this note, then this one, and then record in just this chord by itself. And then go on to the next one and the next one and piece it all together. And this is going to give you a much more human touch to your chord progressions because you're actually playing all of them in. You're just kind of punching in when you record instead of doing it all in one go. And one more thing while we're on the topic of playing stuff on the keyboard, I would highly recommend that you get yourself one of these. This is called a sustain pedal. And what this does is when you press this down with your foot, if I play a note like that, it just stops. But if this is pressed down, that note will play out forever. And it also gives it a much more spacey sound. So those sustain pedals are only like 15, 20 bucks. I highly recommend that you get one of those if you're trying to learn how to play the keys. Another thing I want to point out is if you want to have a complex loop that has a ton of melodies and counter melodies going on, you really want to make sure that you've got a bunch of different sections in your loop instead of just trying to jam pack them all in one section. For a perfect example of this, I've got this loop that I just made that, as you can tell, has quite a bit going on right here. And if I was just to put every single layer going on all at the same exact time, it would just sound like a huge mess of stuff. So as you can see, I've got vocals in the beginning right here, but nowhere else in the loop. I've got these violins only playing right here. This violin is only playing in this section of the loop. There's a bunch of different sections that producers could sample, but not everything is fighting for space all at the same time. And also, one key thing that I do with my arrangements, especially when I'm using stuff like vocal chops that take up a lot of space, especially the space that a rapper or a singer is going to take up because they're filling up the same frequencies, they're both vocals, is I'll put the vocals unfiltered as the intro or kind of the hook of the melody. It hooks the listener in right away because it sounds super ear grabbing, but immediately after, you see right here, the vocals are gone, and this leaves space for the drums to come in, for a rapper to come on. So if we take a listen to this loop right here, if you were gonna try to rap over this, it's over. There's no space, right? Same with this section right here. But it sounds cool. It's building up. But then right here it kind of drops out. Now there's room for a rapper to come in and do his thing. And then it progresses to different sections from there. Switches up again. Whole different section that has a ton of space. And to show you that there is enough space with some drums, this is what that sounds like. So definitely put the most attention grabbing and amazing part of your loop first, but then drop it out and leave room for drums and a rapper to come in for the second section. And another thing that I really want to stress that kind of goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about is you never want to add a sound just to add a sound. Every sound that you put in your beat or loop should have intention and purpose behind it. So maybe you are making the melody and it just feels a little bit empty on the hook section. The build up didn't feel like it built up enough. Maybe you could layer your piano chords with some synth chords that help fill it out. But if you've already got 3 different layers of chords, 2 different melodies, and then you just want to add some accent and texture sounds for no reason, chances are it's just taking space up in the mix and sound more messy and muddier. So if I were you, I would just try to stick to as little sounds as possible. And if you do have a lot of sounds, make sure that you can justify how they fit in and why they should be there in the first place. One other thing you can do to make your beats or melodies sound more cohesive is to match the rhythm of your melody and chords with the rhythm of your drums. I've done this here on this beat. As you can hear in this loop, it kind of goes bum, bum, bum. One more time. Right? So that's like a big theme in the music of it. So I followed that with the kick and the 808. One more time. It just sounds super cohesive. And one other thing that I did in this melody that makes it super, super catchy is I use this strategy where you repeat one melody 3 times in a row, and then on the 4th time, you switch it up to resolve the pattern. And you can use this strategy for your top line melodies, your chord progressions. So for example, if we take this soul sample right here, and then we just chop that and then get rid of this whole middle section right here. And we just play this 3 times in a row. And then right here on the 4th time, it switches to that different chord. You can get something like this. So that strategy is super easy to use and it can make stuff a lot more catchy and repetitive. So yeah, I would highly recommend this if you want to have some more catchy melodies. While we're on the topic of music theory, I want to go through 2 go-to chord progressions that you can use for trap stuff and then also for some more smooth emotional stuff. So let's start with the easiest one, which is trap. It's pretty much just a minor chord. And then on the second time around, you take the middle note of your minor chord and you go down 1 note. And this half step right here, where it's just 1 note distance, creates such a dark and kind of hard energy that is super perfect for trap beats. So it sounds like this. And as you can hear, like, you can already hear some hard drums over that and it could be a decent loop. But if you want to spice up the progression, there's 2 super easy ways to do this. But honestly, there's so many different directions you can go with this chord progression. One of the easiest ways that you can kind of spice this up is just duplicate it over like this and then pitch it up 5 or down 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or you can grab all those notes and then put them down 5. So you can do that or duplicate it over like this and then just change the bass notes. So don't even mess with anything up here. Make sure they're still in the key. You get a whole different feeling on the second half of this progression. So that by far is my most used progression for trap melodies, but this right here is by far my go-to chord progression for R&B and soul kind of melodies. It's super basic and easy to create, but you can use it in so many different ways to get a bunch of mileage out of it. So this is what it sounds like. And real quick, I'm gonna just run down how you can make this from scratch. I do everything in the key of C minor. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is make a major 7th chord. And then for the next chord in our progression, we go to a minor 7th, and that would just go down one right here. And instead of having 3 spaces right here and 3 spaces right here, you're gonna put this down so there's 2 spaces right here, and put this one down so there's 2 spaces right there, but there's still 4 notes. And then you just copy that same minor chord over again and put it down 2. So now you get this progression, which is super good. But this brings me to my next point for spicing up your chord progressions. You can mess around with a ton of different things, but the first thing that I want to mention is inversions. So let's say you've used this exact chord progression in this layout for 5 beats and you're getting sick of it and you kind of want to spice it up a bit. So you can keep the exact same rhythm in everything, the order of the chords, but just change the inversions. And what that means is you just change which octaves that these notes are playing in. So I grabbed all of these second notes in the chord and put them up an octave, and this gives it a different sound. I could also put this one up right here. So now we're getting an even different sound. And then we could duplicate this over again. You can copy those, but then you can just change the order of the chords. So instead of this chord playing first, I can make this chord play first. You could do that. You can completely reverse the order. So you just drag them so they're in a reverse position. And this makes the progression already a lot less repetitive, but you can even take it a step further and on the second half, invert the chords differently. So just like that, you have a completely different feeling than what you started with, but you're using the same exact chords. And then on top of messing with the order of the chords and the inversions of the chords, you can also mess with the rhythm. So let's say I want to change the rhythm to something more like this, which sounds completely different. This can create a whole different bounce for the beat. And you can see how just messing with all of these different things can help you have one basic chord progression and transform it into endless possibilities. For my next point, this doesn't really have to do with music theory, but before I get into some real sauce, I really want to stress that you want to obsess about making your stuff easy to use. I see so many people who export their loops without putting the BPM, the key, putting their name on the sample. I hyper focus on making my stuff as easy to use as possible. Everything from the mixing, I take out the low end so I make sure that they can add an 808 easy, how I name my files. So let's get in and I'll show you exactly how I export all of my loops. And in my opinion, this is close to the best that you can get without overdoing it. So if I drag in this loop that I just made, Drowning in Diamonds, as you can see, whenever you drag it in, it also comes with this MIDI file. I export the bass root notes of the progression from my loop as a MIDI file. So whenever someone grabs my loop, they automatically have the notes. So that instantly just saved whoever is going to make this a couple of minutes figuring out what notes go with the 808, and it just makes it a lot easier and smoother to use your stuff. And then if we go to the end here, I always stem out my loops. And if you're looking at this like, what the hell are all these like big spikes in the audio? I actually do that on purpose. And what this is this is a hi-hat hit in between my stems. So I stem out every individual layer 4 bars apart so that if there's any reverb, it doesn't cut over into the next stem and make it unusable. But if you're still wondering what this is a hi-hat. And why would I put a hi-hat in a loop? If you put it right there 2 bars in, so right in the middle of that 4-bar pause right there, when someone drags in this loop, you can chop it every single time you see that huge audio file spike. So if we drag all of these on top of each other really quick, you can see that everything's lined up perfectly, so it's not confusing as to where stuff starts and begins. I promise you, if you're not doing stuff like this to make your stuff easy to use for other producers, you're just killing your chances, because there's a lot of people who, if they can't figure out the 808 notes right away, they might just trash trash the beat, they might be like, I don't know, the beat's not that crazy anyways, I'll just move on to the next idea. It's a sad reality, but people do work like that. So in my eyes, why wouldn't you do everything you can to make your stuff as easy to use so as many people will use it as possible? And I know I've been going through a lot of information right now, but stick with me because I'm going to get into some real sauce in just a second. But before that, I really do want to stress that the biggest thing that you can do to get better at making music is just putting the time in. I promise you, if you do 5 beats or 5 loops a day, every single day for a whole year, you're going to improve 10 times faster than if you were just cooking up whenever you felt like it. And I also get a bunch of people asking me, how do I stay inspired to keep creating new melodies? And honestly, I feel like I've gotten to a point with my skills where if I sit down and I have an hour to make a loop, it's going to come out good. It may not be the craziest loop that you've ever heard in your life, but I really don't have problems coming up with good stuff anymore because my skills have gotten me to a level where it's almost like muscle memory. So honestly, I think the best advice is to just put the reps in, put the time in. It's boring advice. Nobody wants to hear it, but it's the truth. All right. And for the final section of this video, we've got VSTs and plugins. And I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for this, so thank you for sticking around to the end of the video, but let's just dive right in. My first go-to plugin is the H910 Harmonizer. Shout out Mario Luciano for putting me onto this one. This is an effect plugin and it can do so much stuff, but my favorite thing to use it for is pitching down. And I use this preset all the time, the minor 2 down preset. To demo this, I just dragged in a bell starter from the Mini Stash 2 kit and it sounds like this with no effects. When you put this on, it just really enhances that like Q beats, detuned, vintage, like warped, messed up kind of sound. If I go like really extreme, pitching it down a lot, you can hear how it's like really messing up the audio. But like when you use it subtly, and it's also got a bunch of cool delays like this one right here. It's just super good for adding like crazy texture, especially to dark trap Q beat style of loops. All right, for my next plugin, I've got Decimart 2, and this is a bit crusher, but if you turn on this knob right here, it doesn't give that weird bit crushed kind of sound, and instead it's like perfect filter if you want to go for those Drake and Noah 40 underwater EQ'd kind of sound. So right now, if we play this vocal from the Mini Stash with no effects, it sounds like this. Love only, baby, put it all on. And then as we dial this knob down, I just wanna hear it sound for me. Oh, put your love on me. You can hear that's that perfect like Drake R&B sound. Definitely check this one out. Another great plugin that I highly recommend is not really just one plugin, it's a subscription. It's the UAD Spark subscription. As you can see right here, they've got a bunch of compressors, delays, tape machine plugins, and stuff like that. If you're looking to get some super good plugins for that vintage sampled kind of sound without breaking the bank buying every single one of these individually, the UAD Spark is a super good option. And it also comes with my go-to organ that I use all the time. It's called the UAD Waterfall organ. Sounds super dope. And kind of following the same theme as that, the Arteria V collection is a must-have, and you can get it for a rent-to-own subscription on Splice. So you're not even just paying a subscription for eternity to use the plugins. Eventually you will have paid it all off, but if I remember correctly, it's only 25 bucks a month, and you get all of these synths that you see right here, and they all have hundreds of presets inside of them. It's honestly a no-brainer. You could not have any other synth VSTs and just use these, and you would have every sound that you need. The next plugin that I use all the time is this Chris Hines Strings Compact. He has a full version where you can get way more stuff, but it's super expensive. I think this one was only $100, and for the quality of how this sounds, it's totally worth it. Super great plugin. All right, for the next plugin, we've got Cymatics Deja Vu, which is a completely free plugin, and it's super great. It's pretty much just a free version of Halftime. And if we put this half speed on it, you can also mess with how it does the half speed. So right now it's on 1 bar, but if I show you an extreme example, you could go to a 16th note. So right now it's like, it's pitched down, but it's still playing all the notes. But as you go up, it plays less and less notes. Super great go-to plugin that you should definitely have in your arsenal. And then for the next plugin, this is by no means a secret, but the H delay from Waves is amazing. If we turn it on right out of the gate, it sounds super good. But you can mess with some of these settings to get some really interesting kind of sounds. So if I move this delay time a little bit up, and then I can also EQ the delay. So right now, all of the frequencies are delaying, but let's say I don't want any low end and I only want a little bit of high end. I can just bring these knobs down. So now the delay is not as harsh. And then you can go right here and I'll put it up really high so you can really see. But if you mess with the modulation of the delay, it like warps the pitch of the delay and it gives it this super cool retro vibe. Another great delay plugin is this tape delay from Arturia. If I just play this really quick, you can hear how insane some of these delays are. It's just adding so many weird little moments in there. But it also has some more chill presets. But it's doing more than just like some echo. There's a free demo of this. As you can see, that's what I'm using. It just lets you use it for like 20 minutes, I think. But if you just bounce it to audio after you use it, you don't have to buy the full version. So there you go. There's some free sauce. And then this last one is by no means a secret either, but Valhalla Vintage Verb is my go-to reverb. It is honestly one of like only 2 reverbs that I use in all of my loops and all of my beats. It just sounds too good. That's all the tips I got for you guys today. But as promised, I have this 100% free cheat sheet that you can download. It's a PDF with just a bunch of sauce and some more in-depth stuff that I can go over in this video. It'll be a free download in the description down below. But that's all for me today.